now, I think. Okay, so we have started recording. So we want to welcome everyone to the presentation tonight. Thank you all for attending. We hope that this is helpful and beneficial for you. So I'm Santina Williams, and that's Brittany Jones. So we both are a part of the mental health team at the Trenton MFRC. And tonight we're going to be presenting on communication for co-parenting. We're kind of going to start with some of the basics. And just give you some suggestions, tips, tricks, techniques, and things like that. So we'll get started now.
So just kind of to give you some information about kind of our agenda for tonight. So we're going to start with going over separation story. Then we're going to go through some coping and adapting for helping your children. We're going to go through some information about answering tough questions. Then we're going to jump into co-parenting and how that relates to communication and conflict. And then we're going to go over some tools for practical application.
And during this webinar, if you do have any questions that come up, absolutely write them down, and we're going to ask you to email them to us after the fact, just because since we're recording and we can keep that confidentiality. And also let us know if there's something else that you're looking for as well, especially when it comes to webinars. We're always open to suggestions, and then that way we can see what everyone's looking for to meet everyone's needs. Okay, so the separation story. So really, this is your story and no one else's. This can also be something that changes over time, and it's adapted along the way, no matter what stage you're at. So that means if you're newly separated, if you're introducing new partners, if you're going through the divorce process, if you're working on different stages through co-parenting. Again, this story is changing and it is yours. The story will look different depending on who you are telling it to. So that means that we often have people that we trust a little bit more and are in kind of our closer, tight-knit groups. So they might be the people that we tell a little bit more to. But then there's others who are kind of a little bit more outside of the circle, and they don't need to know all of the details. So that story's going to maybe look a little bit different and not be as detailed. So those are just things for you to think about along the way, especially as this process kind of changes within this. So what do you tell them? That's really what we want to talk about. And that's what we call the elevator speech. So it's kind of that go-to instant response that you have. This is going to take time for you to kind of think about. I always encourage people to write it down and practice it a couple times at home, because then it eliminates that kind of uncomfortable feeling that sometimes we get telling this story. The benefits to having this ready and having those kind of two different conversations, depending on who you're telling, it helps you to confirm the truth and stop the rumors and gossip from happening. It really protects your child, because then a lot of people won't ask your child, because sometimes people will go to the kids to find those answers. So it protects them in a huge way. It also lets you decide who needs to know and who needs to know what details. So it helps you to consider, the kids' teachers, doctors, parents of your children's friends, family friends, child care workers, anyone that has some sort of association with your life and your children's life. And again, a huge piece to this, especially nowadays, not everything needs to be aired out over social media. So I do give a lot of caution with that one. And look at who you're telling, and look at what you want the message to say and how you want it to be received.
This will work. Yeah.
So what do you tell the kids? Again, this is going to change along the way, depending on what stage of the separation or divorce you're in. So a huge aspect to this is that truth is important. A lot of the times I get questions about, what do we hide from the kids? I don't want to say things. I'm scared they're going to be upset. Kids know a lot of things. They know a lot more than we expect. They hear conversations when we don't even expect them to. They feed off our energy and our vibes. So truth is important, but only at an age-appropriate explanation. And I get into a little bit more of that later, and I can have more conversations with people individually as well about that. And kids don't need to know all about the adult decisions or a huge reason of why, especially when it comes into certain things that may be hurtful to talk about. And it is, sorry, it is important for kids to know what affects them and what information as of what will change and what will stay the same. So that's kind of my focus area.
So yeah, like we were saying, the biggest thing is that your children need to know that they didn't cause this. They need to know that you both still love and care about them. And at the end of the day, that's the most important message that we can give our children when they're faced with this kind of stress. So here are some of the things that you can do to support your child through this. So one of the best things you can do is trying to retain as much normalcy as possible. Obviously, things are going to be changing, but remember that that predictability gives your child a sense of safety. So stick to the routines as much as possible, regardless of how often your child is going back and forth or what your home situation looks like, because children thrive on that, and that's what helps them feel safe. Another thing is to never make your child choose sides or feel like they need to restrict what they talk about. Keep in mind, this is a stressful situation for them as well. So giving them that space to discuss how they feel comfortable discussing it, and just being neutral and supportive through that, and letting them know that, you know, they're loved and cared for regardless. Just remember that they love you both, and separation is not going to change that. So it's really important, we'll probably talk about this a lot throughout this presentation, is that the child-centered approach. So just remember that that attachment piece is extremely important. It's through that that children find, like it says here, connection, comfort, and they develop resiliency. So we need to focus first on our relationships with the child, because that really is what's most important at the end of the day.
So ages and stages. Going off of what Brittany said, do children cope better at a certain age? No, they just cope differently. And again, a huge piece is the attachment. So no matter what age the kids are at, I can't express enough how crucial that attachment piece plays a role in this. So when it comes to attachment, and if it's a positive attachment and a healthy attachment, secure attachment, there are long-term positive changes, and it's the cornerstone of mental health and resiliency. So a child needs at least one secure attachment in their life in order to buffer the adverse side effects of things such as trauma, separation, divorce, high stress situations, mental health concerns, etc. So again, the attachment and giving them that sense of security, stability, and safety is key to success. So we can't parent children, even adult children or young children, if we don't have their trust. In order to have that trust, we need that healthy attachment. So this does have an effect when it comes to separation and divorce. Kids can sense if a parent is not responsive or if they're preoccupied, and they can sense and really feel if they're not connected to that parent. And you'll notice that they do start to pull away. And in a sense, when they even do that, they're really trying to deeply connect to that parent, but they can sense what is happening. And sometimes when that happens, they will feel a sense of betrayal, and they do wonder if they're truly loved. So when it comes to that, again, connection is key, and it really creates that sense of safety. So going back to the ages and stages, this is probably something that I could do a whole lecture on itself on. But since we don't have a ton of time tonight, I'm going to focus specifically on school age and just go through it briefly. Because again, the safety and attachment is crucial for this whole piece. So when it comes to school age, this is the most common age for questions, misconceptions, and kids at this age often will create their own answers based on what they see, hear, and sense. They often are very worried about what the other parent is feeling, going through, and they focus on very much what is fair. So to help kids through this stage, answering their questions, clearing up their misconceptions, allowing them that room and space to explore what they're feeling, and that creates a perfect opportunity to to clear up those misconceptions. And again, it's also very common at this age that you will notice some more physical symptoms. So kids may have a hard time articulating what they're feeling, but you will sense things like stomach aches and moments where they kind of get upset. They may try and use things such as distraction, and sometimes they want to hide what they're feeling. And at times, kids at this age can take one parent's side over the other. And this is a huge piece of why keeping that connection and safety with your child is really important. So we've kind of touched on before about how this is a changing process. It's a new experience for everyone involved, and there's different feelings for everyone along the way. So a huge piece to this is that it can be a grief process, and it's very similar to that process for not just kids, but for the family as a whole. And this kind of ebbs and flows depending on what stage you're at in this separation divorce process. So with grief, there is no right or wrong way to deal with it, but it is a process that kids really need to kind of talk through, and they need to be able to adjust to it. And it involves a lot of emotions and changing of emotions along the way. To process it, kids need to feel as if they have a safe place to talk it through. One of my favorite ways to actually encourage kids to be open and talk about it is to say, tell me more about what this feels like for you. Again, it kind of leaves that open-ended question so that they can tell you what they're experiencing. Again, this is something to remember, that for every stage that you are in, no matter what stage. And I think this gives an opportunity for parents to help the children label what they're feeling. And you can help teach them to manage their emotions by managing yours. It's okay for you to feel different feelings along the way too. I've often been asked a lot too, especially when it's newly separation, a parent is upset and a child catches them crying. That's okay. Something you can say is, yes, I'm crying because I'm sad. I will miss this home, but I know that we will make memories in the new home. So acknowledge what you're feeling, validate it, and end with a positive.
It's important to recognize how we're framing some of these questions to our children. Like Santina's example of tell me more really softens that, whereas starting with a why might feel a little bit abrasive. So just letting your child kind of work with that as opposed to making them feel like they're being interrogated.
So those tough questions. This is something that always comes up. And I do get a lot of questions about it. So when those tough questions come up, acknowledge what the children are feeling and validate it, because often kids are looking for reassurance and they just need to talk situations through. So acknowledging it is a really important step. Take a deep breath and listen, and always end with a positive. Think about what they really need and are really looking for in that moment. And this is a good time to assess also if whatever you're going to respond to them, asking yourself, is this kid's business or is this parent business? Because those are two very different things. And again, just be mindful of that. So center yourself, take part in active listening. Look at their body cues, look at how they're reacting, and understand to clarify. So when they say something, say it back to them. You can paraphrase it. You can literally say exactly what they said back. This is kind of a good time for you to process what they're saying. But for them to kind of tell you, yes, that's what I meant, or no, it's not. Take a pause and be mindful. You don't always have to answer the question right away. And if you don't know the answer, it's okay to say to them, you know what? I'm not sure right now, but I'll get back to you when I know. It's also okay that if you didn't answer it the way you wanted to the first time, to come back later and say, you know what? Remember when you asked me that question? I'd like to talk about it again. That's okay too. we're not all perfect, and this is a learning process. One example that often comes up is I've had quite a few parents ask me, what do I say when my kid asks me why I can't stay with you all the time? Again, acknowledge their feelings. So, I can tell that this is really bothering you and you feel upset. I'm gonna miss you too, but mom, dad, wherever they're going, is looking forward to spending time with you because they really love you. But I'm really excited to do that gardening when you come back home. I added the book on here by Karen Bonnell, the Co-Parenting Handbook. They give a lot of really, really good tips and tricks of how to answer those tough questions. So that's definitely one that I recommend.
So when we're thinking about moving into co-parenting versus your relationship dynamic, you need to really look at that dynamic between you and your co-parent to consider how you're going to move forward. Some of the things that I would suggest kind of evaluating as you come up with your co-parenting plan are things like any past or current hurts in the relationship. An example of this could be like if there was cheating and one partner is feeling betrayed, that could really impact how your communication works moving forward. How your communication was when things were good in your relationship. Did you work well as a team, or was there a lot of conflict? That will impact how things move forward. Do you agree on things with concerning your children or not? Are there safety concerns? What are the main means of communication, or what is the best option for you as co-parents moving forward? And then things like what other people are involved. Is there step parents? Is there other people that need to be considered in this plan? Is there distance to be considered? We're talking about living in different towns, or is one person going to be away for any length of time? Those kind of things. And then obviously, are there any legal restrictions or guidelines that you need to uphold? These are just some of the things that you might need to consider, but all of these things just give you a good example of the kinds of factors you may want to think about as you're developing and discussing how you want to co-parent moving forward to be the most effective and child-centered that you can be. And these things will help you to kind of customize your co-parenting plan to best fit your relationship as it stands now and as it evolves moving forward, in the situation that you're in, whether that be your living situation or again, the relationship. So this, the idea of co-parenting, really need to, again, as I said, kind of address all of those factors, but kind of this new skill that we need to do, when you're in a relationship, the way you parent with the other person is very different because there's kind of this assumption that you're on the same page at least. Now that you're separated, you kind of need to adjust. So some things that we kind of recommend is that no matter what, you need to respect each other as co-parents, even if when you were in your relationship, that wasn't necessarily the case. And part of how you can do this is acknowledge their strengths. So when they're doing something good, give credit where it's due. But also part of that is to create boundaries to make sure that the things that were crossed when things aren't good in your relationship don't continue in a way that's going to negatively impact your child. So focus on that child-centered approach. What's best for the child? It's not about he said, she said. It's not about getting back at one another. It's about your child and what's best for them moving forward. And then follow through with what you say you're going to do. And that's really important, especially when we talk about crossing boundaries. It's also really helpful to have some goals as co-parents for your child, for your relationship, and for your new family dynamic, to know what you're working towards and how to achieve that. And then provide updates for your co-parent on the children only. So we have some tools on that we'll give to you later. But just to be important that it's not about your relationship anymore. It's not about one another. It's about your child and how they're doing and how you can work together to best support
them. So kind of just going off of what Brittany said too. Sometimes you're going to find too that kids will often say things back and forth to each parent, especially at that school age as they get to teenagers. It does happen. Um, and just try and remind yourself that at times they're trying to win parents over for their affection and attention, and they're kind of doing check ins. Take what they say with a grain of salt, acknowledge what they're saying, validate their feelings, be open and ask questions. And just remember, kids are really struggling too. So they're really trying to search for answers. So again, reflect back and see what they're really needing in that moment. When it comes to communicating that piece with your co-parent too, and going off the boundaries, one really good tip that I always suggest is saying something along the lines of, Johnny had told me something this weekend that I was just wondering more about. I'm hoping that you can explain it to me a little bit more. And that's something that you can say to your co-parent, so that it doesn't come off as threatening in a way or making any assumptions, but you're getting kind of that, you're communicating with them, and you're creating those healthy boundaries. So I just wanted to add that in as well. This is a great opportunity to model respectful communication to your children. Again, children watch and see everything, even when we don't think that they're watching. So again, it's a really great opportunity to help teach your kids how to communicate with others and how to respect those boundaries. We bring that up a lot because it is one way to have a successful communication. Everyone has a different level of communication when it comes to co-parenting, and it does depend on what level of conflict you kind of have with that individual. And there are 3 different levels that I will talk about now. So again, this is something, before I get into this is something that is changing over time. And so if you're at one level of conflict and communication, that doesn't mean that it's always going to stay that way. This is kind of an ebb and flow, and depending on situations, it's different for everyone. This is another one of those topics that I could really go into, but I will just touch on it briefly, just so you can kind of take some time and reflect for yourself and see kind of where you're at on that conflict level. So when it comes to the low, this is generally when you have good communication, good boundaries, you're able to kind of talk back and forth, you're able to problem solve together as a team, you have similar goals for the kids and parenting, and generally this then reflects to cooperative co-parenting strategy, and that's kind of when you have rules that kind of ebb and flow. So maybe you're able to reach out to your co-parent and change certain days, go back and forth. You can both attend, the soccer game, the baseball game. You can do birthday parties together. This is not easy. And again, it depends on your conflict level. And then there's medium to high. So that is generally somewhere in the middle. And that's when maybe, you can't always agree on certain things. It's harder to communicate. It's a little bit harder to follow those boundaries. And maybe you have sometimes a different parenting style. This is when, mediation might be helpful, following some sort of guideline, only talking when it's necessary about the kids. There is room for some changes and adaptation, but it's generally at this stage, it's better to kind of have a clear set of rules and guidelines and follow that specifically. Again, with this too, only make promises if you're able to keep them, and that's a huge sign of respect too for the kids and for your fellow co-parent. And then the last level of conflict is the severe and high level. So that is when, this is actually often when most people do relate to. And this is really when that mediation, going to lawyers, setting up a clear and specific guideline is necessary. So maybe asking yourself, setting up different days to go to those games and watch the kids, doing those birthday parties separately. Again, really following that guideline to a T. And if your conflict is high, Maybe there's another party that needs to do the drop-offs and pickups. Maybe somebody else needs to be that communication line between yourself and your co-parent. Again, just reminding yourself that this is a new relationship and it is changing. It's a working one. That's kind of what I like to say to it, because there is room for change and it doesn't just stick to one way. So again, asking yourself and reminding yourself that you want to remain child-centered and doing what is best for the kids. So I just want to talk about parent alienation just briefly. And this kind of relates to when talking about the other parent in front of the child. So you can see the picture that I've added. You can take a kind of brief read through. This is often how children respond and feel when there is parent alienation involved. So what is parent alienation? It's when if we try to make the child feel bad about loving their parent or saying mean things in front of them about the other parent. Often when this happens, children will withdraw out of fear because they are really fearful that they are going to lose the attachment to the other parent. And that in turn actually creates what we call the parent alienation syndrome. So with that, that creates low self-esteem, school struggles. They feel like they're unlovable. So it really, really does affect their self-esteem and their behavior. So some solutions, if that was to happen, is therapy and counseling. And at times, it may be necessary to work on reintegrating the parent that was alienated back into the picture. So a huge thing that I like to talk about for this is, remember when you're talking about the other parent in front of the child, even if you don't think that they're listening, that child is half the other parent. So they often will reflect on how they are like or similar to each parent. So I think that's kind of a good thing to tell ourselves at times. So when we're talking to our kids about the other parent, ask yourself, is this kind? Is it necessary? Is it true? Why am I saying this? And will it help my child in the end? And again, we are human. We make mistakes. And if we do, going back and, saying to your child, I'm really sorry, I was really mad in that moment. This is how I should have reacted instead. So again, I just wanted to briefly touch on that. Just moving forward, and how to have these conversations and what to be aware of, because sometimes we do, like Brittany said, we're trying to have this new co-parent relationship and not bring our own personal like conflict issues into it, but it can be hard. So this is something that I wanted to touch on.
And that piece too that I mentioned before of just kind of reflecting on your past relationship and how that might impact your new relationship is part of this, right? Just reflecting on how we're feeling about the other person personally based on the current situation, and being able to kind of process through that so we don't pass that on to our children.
Yeah, and kids are very, very egocentric. So often they will take things very personally and take a lot of the blame for themselves. So it's just something for us to be all aware of.
So again, just some kind of additional tips and tricks to just kind of think about. Some of this stuff might be common sense to you, but for some people, this transition can be really challenging. So just remember to provide both parents' names to schools, teams, doctors, leave contact information, make sure everybody's informed, because that can be really hurtful if something was to happen at school, for example, and they only called one parent and not the other. Just think of how that might feel to the other person. So just make sure that everybody has information on your situation in that way. And that's where that elevator speech comes in again. For parents who find it more difficult to communicate, use alternate means of communication. So email is a really good one. So just making sure it's solely based on sharing information about the children, that can help kind of eliminate some of that in-person conflict that might happen if you get in the same room. again, some of these next ones, discuss expectations for childcare providers, discuss expectations around traveling, discuss how you're going to handle disputes that come up, discuss your boundaries around rules around calling the other parent and other boundaries like that. Discuss transition updates. You really need to kind of sit down and lay it all out about what your expectations are so that the other person and yourself can uphold them. Because unless you know what everybody is expecting, you can't know what you're not doing right if a dispute was to come up. Keep in mind that we do not want to allow information to flow through your child. So never ask your child for information about what happened or what their other parent is doing. Always seek that information yourself, because asking your child those questions can make them feel kind of stuck in the middle again and make them feel like they're having to choose sides. So just really be careful about how you're using your child kind of as a middleman in your relationship.
And I think to that last point that Brittany said, sometimes it's easier for us to, especially as our kids get older and they have phones and ways to communicate with us. When it comes to, setting up visits and everything like that, to do that with your co-parent. Those are really big adult decisions, what I like to call them. And again, it's a lot of pressure on the kids. So when it comes to that, that's for you and your co-parent to work through. And that's something, you can say to your kids, this is my job and this is your mom, your dad's job. Your job is to be a kid. So let us take this on, and you worry about being a kid. So that's a really important point as well. So again, putting the children first. I think exactly what Brittany and I just talked about, that's a perfect example of one way to put the kids first. Focus forward. Again, this is absolutely a changing relationship. It's new, it's going to change over time. So focus on, okay, maybe this is what happened. What can we do better? What do we need to change in order to keep moving forward? Communicate effectively, honor agreements again, following those guidelines if they're there, following that agreement. Don't make promises if you can't keep them. Maintain those boundaries that you set into place. That's something that's really important. And manage your emotions as much as possible. It is an emotional time for everyone, and it is a process. And it's a great opportunity to model that for your children as well. So those are just some key points to kind of help with this new process, whatever stage you're in. So I wanted to add this. This is the Children's Divorce Bill of Rights, and I got it from Psychology Today. So I'll just briefly, I'll go through some of them now. So this is sometimes what I've gone through them with parents and children. This is something that you can do at home with your kids too. As a parent, child, and co-parent. So every child who has parents that have divorced, they have the right to love and be loved by both of your parents without feeling any guilt or disapproval. They have the right to be protected from your parents' anger with each other. They have the right to be kept out of the middle of your parents' conflict, including the right not carry messages or hear complaints about the other parent. They have the right to not have to choose one parent over the other. So there's 10 of them there, and there's 2 at the end that you can kind of pick. Sometimes I ask what the kids want from it, and sometimes the parent comes up with one too. And then I always have the child sign it and both parents sign it. And this is an agreement that you can put up on the fridge or come back to. It's a good kind of self-reflection and self-check it sometimes. And kids do really well by hearing that they have some rights in this too. So I think this is an important concept. So I just wanted to add it in. You're welcome to take a read through. We will be sending this out after the fact. But again, you can always find it on Psychology Today as well.
Yeah, it's really important to make your kids feel kind of empowered through this transition, because oftentimes they can feel like they have no say, and that they're kind of left behind a little bit. So this is a really kind of effective way to help them feel kind of empowered, and like they have some control over the situation that they're in, and that things are going to be okay.
So we want to just take a moment and say thank you for attending tonight. We hope that this was helpful in some sort of way. If you have any further questions going forward, you can contact the mental health at trentonmfrc.ca. If you're looking for resources for counseling services, and if you have more questions about this webinar specifically, you can email myself or Brittany as well, and give us any suggestions that you have going forward. Thank you.